Hello, I'm Ali Plumb, and I'd like to welcome you to day one of the BFI Future Film Festival 2023. This festival is bigger than ever before, with in-person events happening at the BFI South Bank in London and a whole free online program for our audiences outside of London to also explore. You can check the program out and register for events, as well as buy festival passes on the BFI website. So, that's all there for you to discover. But for now, please do enjoy my interview with Rebellion's Jason Kingsley. So, Jason, could you do me a
Yeah,
favor and introduce yourself to the class? How would you describe who you are, what you do, where you come from?
my name's Jason Kingsley. Her Majesty, who's passed away now, gave me an OBE a while ago. I rarely use the OBE after my name because it always sounds a bit pretentious, but it is there. It's kind of nice. My mum, in particular, was dead impressed at getting that. I'm the co-founder, CEO, and creative director of Rebellion, which is a big. We started out as a big computer games group. It's still a really big computer games group selling technology across the world. But we also published 2000 AD. We run Solaris Books, so we have book publishing strand, and we do tabletop games and quite a few other bits and bobs, including 250,000 square foot of film studio that's in development. And I'm fascinated by the nexus of technology, creativity, and storytelling.
Wow, what a great answer to the most basic of questions. Bravo. I'm going to ask you, though, to look back, way back in your mind. Where did it all begin for you? How did you first get into the industries you now are part of?
I've always been in the industries I'm now a part of, right from the very earliest days. I can remember reading genre books, science fiction, fantasy, Lord of the Rings. I think I read Lord of the Rings when I was 8 years old the first time. It was the biggest book I'd ever set my hands on. It's like, okay, this is it. And it didn't have many pictures. I remember thinking, there aren't many pictures in this book. This is going to be hard work. So I've always been in genre, entertainment, fantasy, and obviously I went through. When you're young, you don't have the options really. I went through a fairly typical academic route. I went to Oxford, did a zoology degree, so studied science to up to master's level. But throughout that, I was interested in the process and business of creativity as well as being creative. So at heart, I'm a writer and designer and an artist up to a point, although my physical art abilities are a bit rusty. I also love embracing the technological part of the creative process. So, yeah, I always feel like I never really got a job. I just kept doing what I loved as a kid and turned it into something that would potentially earn me a living.
At the risk of being indelicate, what year was it that you graduated with a zoology degree and then realized, hang on, maybe animals aren't going to be a big part of my life?
Well, funnily enough, animals are a huge part of my life. I look after 17 horses myself. I look after and train medieval war horses in my other guise as on Modern History TV, which is a YouTube channel where I talk about all things medieval. So weirdly, horses, well, animals in general have been a huge part of my life. But it was 1984 when I sort of finished, when I graduated, finished the bulk of my professional education. Having said that, I don't think education should ever really finish. I think one should continue to learn new things. There's nothing better in my mind than reading an article or watching a YouTube video or listening to somebody say something about how they work and then going, that's a really good idea. I hadn't thought of
Yeah.
that. And that is continuous education. So it seems a bit weird to tell people who are still in the sort of the educational process, the sort of the more not exactly the treadmill, but the more organized part of learning. Um, and I would say never stop learning. That's a really important part of any professional development, whatever category you're in. If you're a doctor working in a hospital, you're going to be learning all the time anyway.
Totally. But am I right in thinking that you founded Rebellion with your brother? Is that right?
Yes, I founded Rebellion with my brother, and people often ask, why did you want to do that? Why did you want to found a company? And the simple answer was I've been freelance for quite a long time, making computer games, helping other people make computer games, and I found that I was actually doing quite a lot of the management and production side of it. Back in those days, it was roughly 3 or 4 people to make a computer game. Now it's 300 or 400 people. So, but I was still doing quite a lot of the organizing, and I wasn't being paid to organize it. I just sort of fell into it. I have this annoying habit of anything I get involved in, I want to try and help make it better. And I've tried so hard to not get involved, but I just seem to get dragged into into organizing things a little bit for people. And I'm sure some of the people listening to this will recognize that you almost can't help yourself. You can't help but try and kind of do things well. I dislike inefficiency. I like things to be efficient and good.
It's the backseat management, backseat production. You can't help yourself, and that's what makes it good. And you want the product that you're putting your name onto to be as good as every other one you've done. So it pays to care. I'm with you totally.
Absolutely. I think the key thing about making anything is that you have to want to make it. And you have a target and an objective for that thing, whatever it might be. It might be to win awards, it might be to be commercially successful, or a combination of both. Or it might be because nobody's done it before and you just think, I'm going to have a go at doing it this way. And so those objectives are sort of individual. And it's almost it's a curse and a blessing of being a doer, is that you finish one thing and then you come up with another idea, and then you think, okay, I'm going to start on this journey now. So I go for it. Basically, that's what I've done in my whole life.
Tell me though about how long it took to make a game back in the 80s. You mentioned it was 3 to 4 people. What was the process back then, soup to nuts, of making a video game?
Right. Well, very early stages of me making computer games, it was probably a designer and a coder, or an artist and a coder. And they usually were sort of integrated a bit. So a lot of programmers that did art, a lot of artists that coded a bit. Everybody had to be a kind of a person of the Renaissance, really. You did every aspect of it. It was also a bit more seat of the pants. I remember if you were working as a professional, you could pitch a computer game with one sheet of daisy wheel printed or dot matrix printed paper. Always get the stuff with the really fine perforations because they tear better. It's not much nicer than the really cheap paper you could get with a dot matrix printer for special presentations. One page of that and maybe a screenshot, maybe a mock-up of a sketch or something like that. That was enough, if the idea was good enough, to get somebody to pay for you over space of 6 months to a year to make a game from start to finish. And again, back in the day, the process was, well, there wasn't really a process. There were actually no professionals in the business. There were no professional games makers. There were people that made games professionally, and the skills of producer, of artist, of animator, of motion capture director, of lighting artist. Now we're talking about 300 or 400 people over 3 years to make a big competitive game like we do, like the Sniper Elite series or the Zombie Army series. So it is many, many millions of pounds to make a computer game now. And in fact, I think a lot of the big computer games are as big as some of the bigger movies.
I'd say so.
Yeah.
I think movies can be conceived, created, shot, edited, and VFX'd and pumped out to cinemas. I mean, compare that to some sort of Naughty Dog release, you'd be joking. No way. Doesn't touch the sides time-wise. But now you're looking at all these different people. Are there whole departments of game design that didn't exist back then that do now?
Every single skill that we use in computer games has its own specialist and specialist department now. So you will have the user interface, you will have a user experience expert, you will have a director of the user interface. There's probably 5 people that work on just the user interface for a game. Back in the day, you whacked together a list of options you had and then pressed play and played the game. The user interface was as simple as that. There are also no standardized control systems. There was no language for the broad market. The market, again, was a very specialist hobby market. And those people would work hard to get the game they've just bought to work. Whereas now people download it. If they don't like it, they fling it and get it refunded, and it's gone. So in a way, the market's got vastly bigger. I mean, the market for computer games is substantially bigger than the market for movies and TV combined. Bigger than music. It's enormously big, and it's really
Huge.
weird to say that.
Yeah, I find it very strange that it's viewed as some sort of subculture or geeky, reclusive pursuit when I cannot think of a single human being that doesn't enjoy video games on a
Yeah.
daily basis.
Yes, absolutely. It's really unusual to come across somebody that doesn't, occasionally play computer games. It's a weird one. I remember talking to a BBC journalist a few years ago, and I often try and sort of soften these kind of things, not make them adversarial, because I'm interested in having an interesting chat with the journalist and asking them questions. And I asked them what games they'd played recently, because I thought I'd get a read on, do they like adventure games, or no, they don't play computer games. And I thought, okay, so that's going to be a bit awkward. So you don't even understand the language of computer games. You're coming to interview me. And I thought in my head, I thought it was a bit odd. I mean, imagine going to interview a professional footballer and saying, yeah, I've never watched a game of football. I don't know how it works, but I've kind of heard something about football. It's about some people kicking a ball around. Do you want to start there and help me understand what football's all about? The
Yeah,
professional footballer would just probably tell you to bugger off and not
yeah,
do it.
do one.
Sort of a slightly odd, it's a weird one. It's almost as if the games industry has expanded so rapidly, sort of almost unnoticed by other aspects of the media in a weird way. I was talking to somebody about how many. I mean, I've got an OBE for services to the economy because of the computer game stuff I do. Because I'm the chair of Tiger, which is one of the trade bodies, I think, in part. Um, and I looked into how many people, and I looked into how many people have got gongs, for example, in the games industry. It's not very many. It's really not very many. There are many more
Really?
people in the opera industry who've got knighthoods and damehoods and various different gongs. And I think that's just indicative of the speed with which the industry has grown and where it's come from. I reckon in 50 years' time, yeah, people are probably going to be, I don't know, it's a horrible thought. I'll be gone, but there'll be people maybe writing books about the early days of the computer games industry and using interviews like this to try and work out what it was like.
I'd be very happy if that were the case. I'm just thinking if there's a Royal Opera House, there should be a Royal Games Arcade. Can we
Yeah.
please, in some fashion, make this happen?
What a
But
great idea. It could be really opulent inside and sort of like Rococo and it just
I, I want it to be at least a little bit like Tron. That's all I'm asking for. So if we could rewind back to all the different departments of what of the people that make up and create a video or computer game right now, you got playtesting. I mean, I finished God of War Ragnarok, well done me, the other day, and there were like 2 pages just for playtesting. Do you find from your perspective that many young people aren't even fully aware of all of the opportunities that are within the games industry? And actually, if there was a bit of light shone upon them, they might go, that might be good for me. How do I get involved?
100% agree with you. Yes, people think about to make computer games, you've got to be a programmer, and some people have. Yeah, absolutely, and that's a very, very important and difficult tech skill. Requires a certain personality, requires a lot of skills. It's highly paid, and very well regarded, and quite hard actually. Programming is all about problem solving the whole time. But you've also got other skills as well. You've got producers who organize things. You've got assistant producers who might organize certain aspects of it. You will have artists, but there'll be different specialities of artists. You will have script writers, for example. The average computer game has 2 or 3 script writers working on it full time. There's as much writing in the average computer game as in several novels. I mean, literally several novels. There's as much music. Composers, we use musicians, orchestras, all that kind of stuff. There's usually more music in a computer game than there is in your average symphony or opera. These things are just, everything is added there, let alone movement. So, for example, you need talented movement experts. There might be performers that are very good at fighting, and so you motion capture those. You need motion capture directors to get the best performance with the knowledge of how that performance is going to be slotted into the game and how it's going to be cut up. You need background artists and foreground artists. It's there's probably as many jobs and then some, as there are in making movies or making TV shows or anything like that. Down to facilities and infrastructure, people that've got to maintain the IT infrastructure. You've got facilities that've got to make sure things are where people need them to be. Yeah, it used to be one or two of us coming up with a good idea, making a
Yeah.
game. It's an awful lot more than that now. It's a proper. I think it was NASA once said the two most difficult things, technically difficult things to do in the world are making computer games and flying to the moon.
Least of all a flying to the moon simulator, which is an absolute, I mean, it's not rocket science, but it's close. I was wondering though, Jason, do you have an answer to that classic question of how do I get into the industry? Because I know there's no typical route in, but maybe might you have some examples of how people that work for your company or colleagues of yours have made it into the industry and have become part of the fabric of video game creation?
Broadly speaking, there are three main strands. So if you are interested in kind of organizing and getting things sort of designed and managed, then QA, quality assurance testing, is quite a good way to understand the ins and outs of the computer game. So a lot of people in production, for example, start in quality assurance. They start in the sort of testing process because they get to see the game in all its terrible broken glory for quite a long time. So they get to understand the underlying process. Not everybody comes from QA, but some people do. Some people come from other disciplines. And then you got your technical skills, your coding and your technical art skills. And those typically these days require a portfolio or a sort of slightly more formal education. So we might hire somebody with a physics degree who's done a huge amount of coding in part of their physics degree. They haven't done a games degree, they've done a physics degree, but their coding is such that they want to work in games, and that's very transferable skill. The art stuff is even more recognizable for people. You need a portfolio. You need a portfolio of work. Please don't use AI generated artwork. This is a problem at the moment for everybody. It's a waste of everybody's time because AI art is a very useful starting point for some people, like sketching outlines and then filling the outlines in. There's lots of different ways of kicking off the process. But for goodness sake, don't deliver AI art as part of your portfolio, because if somebody will find out, and when they find out, you'll just be got rid of. It's just not. And when you're putting a portfolio together for your artwork, put your best stuff forwards. Don't also have in your portfolio some artwork that your teacher at secondary school said was quite good, because it probably was quite good for somebody who was 12, but it's not professional standard and it doesn't actually add. It kind of makes it sweet, but it also makes your judgment wrong. So an online portfolio is just as good. You don't actually have to have a big physical thing like we used to have back in the day. You had a sort of A2 and you have to carry it around. You can just have it all digitally. And there are plenty of places online to talk with people that are talking about this, and people get spotted online as well and offered jobs. So that sometimes happens.
I was wondering if there were a website or two that you find yourselves using to find talent, because from my perspective, it seems as if, you're finding somebody who's got a physics degree. How are you doing that?
We just advertise in various different places. So, for example, if we wanted people in the publishing industry, we'd probably advertise in the Guardian jobs. That sort of gets people who are interested in that kind of particular area. Broadly speaking, though, we're quite well known, so people will come to us, to our website, to look at the jobs we've got there, and we put up the jobs there. There's almost always a certain number of types of jobs because to keep those vacancies open, because
Mhm.
it's always hard to find certain roles. Technical artists, coder are always sought after, highly paid and very sought after. So we always keep those almost always keep those open. But we look around. We'll look at art groups on Reddit. We'll look at sometimes we look at people's portfolios online. Social media in general. And if somebody fulfills a particular role or we think they're really great, the HR team might reach out to them direct and say, just to let you know, thought your artwork was great. There are some job vacancies here. Should we be interested? And often people aren't. They're just happy doing their own artwork, and sometimes they're really excited about it. And we do these days, especially post COVID, we do a lot of hybrid work as well. So without turning this into an advert for my company, I think that the kind of whole creative work-life balance and the schedule and your sort of schedule of work over the last few years has just massively changed. So, for example, I might start work because I typically don't go into the office these days, but I'm on Zoom and doing things all the time. So I might start doing some of my first work at 5 or 6 in the morning. I tend to get up very early, and I'll probably still be sending emails at 10 at night when it takes me. I don't expect staff to answer me at that time. I always have this standing rule, which is just if you get an email from me, you don't have to answer it straight away unless I say this is a real emergency. You need to answer it straight away. You can just answer it in the next. It's just because I want to get it down on, I was going to say get it down on paper, but that's not true. Get it down in pixels and sent to somebody but to kick off the next day. So yeah, the whole kind of, people often say, work-life balance. Well, I'm lucky enough not really to have a work-life balance because everything's sort of integrated for me entirely.
Mm. I was wondering if you could do the unfair thing of picking your favorite products, releases that you've unveiled upon the world over the past few decades. Is it Alien versus Predator? What are the highlights for you? You've already mentioned Sniper Elite, of course, but what have been the big milestones for you in terms of games you've made?
I always have a favorite, which is the latest game we're working on, and the next game to get out there, because just finishing a game and getting it to market is a heck of an achievement, whether it's good or
Yeah.
bad. Nobody ever tries to make something bad. We all try to make something good, but sometimes the magic works and sometimes it doesn't. So the latest game we're working on is always my favorite, but there have been milestones. For example, Aliens versus Predator was a milestone for us in that it was playing with somebody else's IP, intellectual
Hmm.
property, but making a really good creative game that worked incredibly well worldwide. So that really put us on the market. Really got people to notice us as creatives. It's a long, long time ago now, and you look at it and you think, yeah, it's quite ropey, isn't it? But at the time,
Hmm.
it was state of the art. And we look at, you look back at things and you go, how did we get away with selling that? But it was impressive compared to what had come before. So we all stand on the shoulders of giants. Then I think a big milestone for us was the first sniper. It was the second Sniper Elite, sorry, because we that was more of that was one of the first projects that we fully self-funded, made ourselves, and took the risk on doing. So that was the sea change, working for hire for other people. We did games on the Simpsons and Star Wars and James Bond and all sorts of Harry Potter, but they were all for other people according to
Hmm.
their requirements. And the Sniper Elite series was the first of our games that we made ourselves because we wanted to, and we fully self-funded it, developed it, took it all the way to the marketplace, and released it to great success. And that's what we do now. We only do games for ourselves.
You've listed all those different pieces of intellectual property there, like James Bond and so on. Was it making those games where you felt that you were the busiest in your career when you are liaising and working with all these different quote unquote masters?
It's a different kind of business, actually. It's more there's more wrangling of people's opinions uh, who are not exactly skilled in some of the abilities that they're being paid to be skilled in. I'm trying to be politically savvy here. There are an awful lot of people in an awful lot of companies who are brilliant at their jobs. There's no question about it. Some really, really good people. There are also some people who are utterly garbage at their job. And working for external people is a matter of trying to manage those relationships.
Hmm.
Now we don't work with external people in the same way, or if we do, we're sort of, we don't have to we don't have to make the changes they suggest. I mean, here's one, for example. We were pitching a game to somebody, and it was a game based on Vikings and dragons. The game never got made. And the person in the room said, we should turn this into a game about hovercrafts. And my brother and I sat there exactly thinking, what? And the other person in the room said, yeah, but the last hovercraft game we made was a real stinker. It didn't sell, did it? And the first guy said, yeah, exactly. So there's massive space in the market for a good hovercraft game. And Chris and I were just sitting there going, what kind of weird dialogue is this? So, yeah, we're pitching this sort of fantasy dragon Viking game, and they're asking us to consider making a hovercraft game, the last one of which was a failure. It's just like a bizarre looking glass moment. Anyway, suffice it to say, we didn't actually work with that company in that way. We did get to make the Dragon and Viking game did get transmogrified into a more fantasy game, but it sort of was the beginnings of a particular game we did for a long time ago. But you get that when you're working for other people, you get things like that. We work for a very big franchise. I won't specify which franchise it is, but it is one of the ones I've mentioned already. And there was an approval from the film studio, an approval from the owners of this particular thing. And they had a sign-off process, which was fine. The sign-off process had to be done simultaneously, and neither side could know whether the other person had approved it, because each of them had a standing rule, which is if the other side approved it, they had to reject it.
What? This is like a nuclear football. You've got to have the special codes.
Exactly. So what we used to do, there was a third party involved, and the third party kept both sides unaware of what had been approved. Anyway, so we managed to conclude that, but that was a pain in the ass. And then just before release, one of the people said, "We don't like the introduction to the game." Everybody involved said, yeah, but you signed it off 4 months ago. It's all gone through that process. It's all signed off. And they said, we don't care. We're unsigning it off. And everybody sat around going, is that actually a thing you can do? That's a bit like unmaking spaghetti, isn't it? Once you've cooked the spaghetti, it's there. It goes, I don't know, dry out again. I don't know. Anyway, it did get solved, but that was one of those, how do we get here? That was one of those annoyances, and that takes up a lot of energy and creative passion. Actually, it absorbs the creative passion and probably makes the product less good as a result of that kind of interference. By and large, though, people we've worked with have been absolutely brilliant, but have on occasions been utter stinkers.
If we rewind back to the hovercraft situation, what is the beginning of a great idea for a video game? It's an impossible question, but are there through lines for your proudest creative moments where you went, this is how we find a good creative start, what will end up being a positive, successful release?
Yeah, it always comes from that initial game idea that Chris or I almost always come up with, which is, wouldn't it be good if you could be a World War II sniper? That's a really cool piece of a way of playing a game, and then everything hangs off that. How do you construct a game around long distance shooting, around sneaking around? Where are you going to do this? Is it going to be on the front line, or is it going to be behind enemy lines? Are you going to be a bit sort of James Bondy and sort of finding secrets, and suddenly everything kind of tumbles out of that idea? Or, for example, Zombie Army. What would it be like if during, and this was interesting because this came from Sniper Elite as well, if during the Second World War, Hitler's obsession with sort of demonic, things like the Spear of Longinus, and they were really interested in this sort of mysticism. It was all coupled, all sort of
Raiders and
weirdly.
all that.
Yeah, it's very, yeah, exactly. Raiders of the Lost Ark. Happens if he suddenly unleashed zombies on us all, and the dead of the Great War, of the wars, all rises up and fights against humanity. What does that mean? And that was kind of fun because that was very tongue in cheek. That was leaning into the silliness. And there's some games you sort of want people to play it not seriously exactly, but play it with a sense of seriousness. Sniper Elite is about that. It's about real war. It's about the secret war behind the war. The Zombie Army is not so sensible. It's about shooting the crap out of hordes of zombies and enjoying yourself with your friends. And as such, it hits a different note. There's a time when you want a serious book. There's a time when you want a comedy book. There's a time when you want a hard to watch movie. There's a time when you want a fun popcorn movie. And so it sort of serves different roles in what we offer to people.
It reminds me of that movie, if you've ever seen it, I imagine you have, called Dead Snow, which has, zombie Nazis, and its tagline is Ein, zwei, die. And there's something about that. There is just something about that idea that is very appealing. I'm with you. I was wondering, what are the most annoying misunderstandings or misapprehensions people have when it comes to making a video game or a computer game, where either the layman or the pseudo layman keeps thinking the same incorrect thought about how it's made and how the world works.
The obvious one is people think a game is based on an idea of a setting. So people might say, I've got this great idea for a game set in Venice. And you go,
Oh, a
and you go,
Venice
okay, yeah,
game. I love
yeah,
them.
yeah. And you go, yeah, well, Venice is a fantastic place to have a game. Yeah, absolutely. What game is it? What do you mean,
Yeah.
what game? You make a game, don't you? Yeah, but there's first-person shooters, third-person shooters, strategy simulators, VR
Puzzle.
experiences, puzzle games. It could be a fishing game. What's the actual gameplay? I have had this a little bit from other areas. So, for example, I've had authors pitch me their idea for a game, and they're pitching me one of their books, and their book's great. It's a great book. And you go, you should make a game in this in the world I've written in my book. And you go, yeah. What kind of game had you in mind, and what sort of budget? And by the way, the budget will be 1,000 times bigger than it cost to make your book. But yeah, I reversed this once. I got a bit annoyed with some people I was at a conference in Los Angeles. I was talking to various people in various different areas, and somebody in the film industry decided they wanted to pitch me a game. And I said, okay, cool. And they pitched me this game that involved two people having an adventure, and it was a bit in India, and they were adventuring through the Himalayas. And I went, yeah, well, great idea for a script. But what's the game? Oh, that's your job. You put the game in. And I said, okay, cool. Oh, while we're about it, I've got this really great pitch for a movie. See what you like. There's this volcano that erupts. And they said, yeah. I said, yeah, but that'd be great. You could write a whole film about this volcano erupting, couldn't you? Yeah, but
Do the
what's
plot.
the
Do,
story?
do the characters.
It's great. Be visually brilliant. It's really big. It's a big mountain, explodes, lava everywhere, and it could be done at night time, and that would look great. And they're going, what? I said, don't you want it as a film? It's brilliant, isn't it? And they didn't get it, bless them. And most of the audience did absolutely get what I was trying to say, which is lots of areas of storytelling overlap into games, but not all games have stories in the same way. Some do. There are plenty of games with no story and no graphics. Some of those are puzzle games, and they're really amusing and all sorts of stuff. But games are incredibly broad church of different things you can do. The key thing is, though, that they're interactive. They give you feedback. There's a feedback loop in them.
I've heard the expression, the kind of idea of gaming is a series of interesting decisions that you are obliged to make. And I think when people approach a game as this would be fun, you go, okay, but what's the interesting decision? Like, what decisions will you be making as the person playing it? And I
Yes.
think that's people aren't aware of the grammar of what a game is and how you interact with it. I would almost like, for all of the critical analysis we have in English literature classes and what have you, it would be quite nice to have computer games be part of that. Why is this game good? Why is it bad? Because it is part of our everyday lives.
Yes, it's actually very hard to dissect some games. Why is this game loop appealing? Why is it fun to do this? But when you're making a game, you notice it. So we're working on a game. It hasn't been announced yet, but it involves a sort of an open world situation, and the player starts not really knowing what's going on. And one of the things I want to encourage as a games designer is them to explore. And to encourage exploring, you've got to give rewards for exploring. There are rewards in exploring. You just see a nice thing, but that's fine. So there's a few sort of locations they can get to initially. And when we were looking at it first, there was nothing in any of those locations that made any reward to the player for going to see them. And I said to the senior designer on the project, I said, the trouble is, there's literally no reason. You've punished the player for exploring. They've used up time. They haven't gained anything. You've taught them early on in the game that there's no point exploring. And the whole point of this game is exploring. You need to put little tiny rewards, little tiny breadcrumbs in most of those places, not all of them. Otherwise, it becomes, oh, I'll go there and get something. I'll go there and get something. You need to have enough to make them explore that, abandoned bus stop. Oh, okay, there's a bandage there. Cool, cool. Okay, great. Then go somewhere else. There's nothing there. Oh, okay, then somewhere else. Oh, there's a single bullet or whatever it is. And so setting up the game and the expectations of the game in the player's mind at the very beginning is really important. And if you start a game and it feels like a first person shooter, it better stay a first person shooter, because if it suddenly changes into a puzzle shoving game, people are going to feel cheated and it isn't what they expect. So it's a sort of almost like setting expectations at the beginning of the process. What it's got to be player focused as well. One of the challenges we have now that people are so specialized in games is people often don't see the wood for the trees. They don't see the entirety of the project, and that's my job, my brother's job. I mean, it's like what are we trying to do for the player here? I don't really care that the AI is off in the top corner left or corner of the map having an interaction with another AI in a really interesting way, because I won't see it and I won't even know it's happening. And worse, it's using lots of production resources that the player doesn't get to hear about, and it's using lots of technology to generate that, and the player won't know about it. It's literally pointless. It's a waste of time. It's all got to coalesce around the player. I sometimes explain it like it'd be a bit like making an action movie where the protagonist walks into the bar and it's all smashed up and somebody's kind of wiping blood off their face, and it's like, what happened? Oh, it's amazing fight in here, but you missed it by 5 minutes. It's okay, cool. And they walk out to the next place, and then you see the aftermath of an explosion in a bus stop or something, and it's like, what happened there? Oh yeah, it was brilliant special effects. It was wonderful. Tons of money went in the explosion, but we didn't catch it on camera. But it was great, and this is all the exposition. And show don't tell is important in computer games as it is in any kind of narrative storytelling. But with computer games, there doesn't need to be necessarily a narrative story, but the narrative is always created in your mind. So even playing a game like Tetris, the story is, can you stay alive for long enough? Can
Yeah.
you keep solving this puzzle faster and faster until you can't? And the challenge is in your mind is, can I get better at it? Can I fix it? Oh, I made a stupid mistake. I've obviously completely messed that up. I'll start again. Can I do better? Can I do better? It's that little risk reward loop that we lean into in computer games. It's really important that it's there.
I think a lot of people don't realize that AAA or AA games are actually a series of very well honed and refined mini games. They don't realize how much this is part of the process. You are playing a small maze game when you're going to the corner of the map and finding that bandage. The traversal across the New York landscape as Spider-Man, that's a mini game. The traversal is the mini game, and then the actual fighting is another one, and then you almost get caught up in the dialogue and the speech and the story that is in of itself almost a game in its own right, and it's a combination of all of these things. I just feel like video games, computer games have an essence, I hope you agree, where people are so still these days blown away by the everything of it, the everythingness of it all, that they don't realize just how much depth there is.
Yes, I think that's hugely important. I want all my entertainment forms to be sort of sit forward and feel like you're through the looking glass. When you're reading a great book or watching a good movie or playing a great computer game, you're not aware you're doing it when it's working well. You're just in the moment, and many times I've done it in my life. You look up and you go, why is it getting light outside? Oh my God, it's the morning. I've just spent the whole my consciousness has been in that computer game. I've been enjoying exploring the irradiated wastelands of Fallout, or enjoyed playing the God of War kind of experience over and over again, trying to solve those beasts or whatever. There's so many great games out there, but the really good ones draw you in and keep you there, and kind of they almost make you escape from the mundane for a few hours, which is really what all entertainment should do.
It is, I think, along with cinema, the purest form of sort of escapism and empathy transference, because you really feel for these characters because you're really there and you're really with them. And we've mentioned already just how much time you spend with these characters, how much time you spend in these worlds. So I don't know, I think we're just at the very beginning of what computer games could be, which leads me to, where do you think the industry is converging? Is there a point at which are you seeing VR being the end of this or being a big part of stuff? Because to me, I'm still a firm believer in, I want to put the controller down and be able to disconnect whenever I want.
No, I think VR is one way of showing stuff. It's very, very immersive, and I think it can be too immersive for some people. It's the sort of thing you can deal with for a period of time, as opposed to playing a game for 10 hours or something. So I think there's space in the games industry for all forms of entertainment: short form, medium, long form entertainment. Just as there's space for all sorts of different books and all sorts of different movies, all sorts of different TV shows. So there is convergence happening, but it's interesting. It's at the tech level. So, for example, the way we tell stories in games is pretty much, we make mini movies now. Sometimes the cutscenes are mini animated movies. You can argue about the quality of them and their budget and all that kind of stuff, but
Or the
broadly
voices, or
speaking,
yeah.
exactly. Broadly speaking, it's exactly the same technology. Yeah, the Unreal Engine. We use our own technology for delivering our games, but a lot of people use the Unreal Engine. I think virtual production is a very exciting area where the technology of games overlaps heavily with the technology of filmmaking and production of linear entertainment. And in many ways, linear entertainment is easier because you direct the view of the participant, of the audience, with the direction. You can control where they're looking. In a computer game you can't, and you can't control the pacing either. So in a movie you can build somebody up with edits and noises and that kind of stuff, and then there's a big reveal and everybody's shocked and oh gosh, and the story moves on. In a computer game you've got to be very careful how you do that, because somebody could have been playing the game really slowly and the reveal isn't a big thing at the right time for them. So you've got to create a slightly different version of the language. But there is a lot of convergence. We're noting a lot of transferable skills in all the screen-based entertainment these days, and particularly in virtual production, which we've done a little bit of in the studios. I did a 3 day shoot for a short virtual production called Percival, which is on my YouTube channel if anybody wants to have a look at it. We did that because we wanted to do a short film, start finish, in the 3 days we had available the technology, and learn about doing it. We're very keen on trying, not necessarily just listening to what other people say. Actually have a go, because I would encourage people to try, because the first thing you do probably won't be that good, but you'll learn an awful lot from it and you'll get better. You know, nobody's good at walking when they're born. You have to learn to walk. And we all forget how good we are at walking now, but there was a time in all our lives when we weren't very good at walking. Yeah, I think convergence is coming at a tech level. To a certain extent, data wrangling. I mean, some of the technology of voice replacement or face replacement is really interesting as well. And you do wonder the amount of stunt work and extras used to show the main character doing the main protagonist in a movie. Sometimes the main actor is on screen a lot less than the support actors are in actual fact, except their face is used. And then you come to the point where, can you actually film somebody else doing it, but substitute a face that is worth more money to the audience on the other actor? There are all sorts of questions. They're ethical as well. They're ethical questions about voice replacement and face replacement, and reusing the faces of sadly gone actors. What are the
Who owns
rules?
the rights to,
Yeah.
the estate of, whoever it might be,
Yeah,
Bruce
exactly.
Willis, sort of.
And I think it's fascinating. We are entering a whole new, I mean, this whole thing of AI writing and AI art, and you could argue AI editing, for example, because editing is a series of decisions, and you can extract the style of editing from a piece, and you can transfer it theoretically to another piece. You can do it with artwork, you can do it with editing. Some of these things, and then what does that mean for all those careers, and what happens, and where do we go from there? Fascinating areas to debate. And over the next few years, we're going to be having a lot of debates about the ethics, and the foundation upon which we build creative things. And it's going to be the same in computer games. It's definitely going to be the same.
I wonder if we're going to reach a sort of uncanny valley for video game editing where a human will be able to sense when it hasn't had another human's hand at the tiller. It's all very, very interesting. Could you, though, for a newcomer to this world, maybe explain the importance of performance capture when it comes to not only the movement, as you mentioned earlier, but also the facial capture of conveying an actor's emotions and then displaying them on your screen?
I suppose it's just turning up the idea of a voice actor then having their voice animated to by Disney back in the day. You
Robin
take the
Williams and all that. Yeah.
you take that performance, they animate to the voice, not the other way around. That's a really important component, that you set the audio track down first and then you take the rough animation and make it fit, because you don't want to constrain the performance of the performers. Motion capture or performance capture is exactly that. So we stick markers on people and lycra suits, and the technology records where those markers move in 3D space, and that can then be played back, and you can see it from any angle. You can see it from underneath, from over the top. You don't have to have worked out where the camera goes in advance. You can just basically replay the performance a million times and film it in a million different ways. And what that does, it gets their characteristics as well. And you do the same with the face. You get all those movement points on the face, usually with markers, lots of different techniques. You get the voice sometimes at the same time. You can then take that data and map it to an identical face, for example, that you can scan the actor's face and map it to that, so you can get all the reactions of what they're doing. Or you can transform it onto a different face, the face of a gorilla, or the face of a goblin, or the face of quite frankly, anything you like, a dragon. And you can take elements, and depending on how the tech works, you can transfer that performance to the way the face would move. So the what's interesting with performance capture is if you are doing a martial arts movie and you need performance from a martial artist, get a good martial artist, because if you motion capture and performance capture somebody who's rubbish at martial arts, they'll be rubbish on the screen. They won't be very good. You take the underlying emotional content, if you like, the underlying quality of the movement, and it is captured. I, for example, can recognize, we've used motion capture. I've been motion captured quite a few times. We got the motion capture studio Audio Motion down in the Didcot place, but we've also motion captured me riding my horses, which is really interesting for a jousting game. And I can recognize the horse, even though it doesn't look like the horse I was on. I know the movement of that horse, and I know my movement well enough to recognize me, even though I'm on a different horse in the game and I'm looking very different.
That's fascinating. And this is another part of the video game creation world that people may not necessarily know is an entry point. It could be not just the performance side, but also the acquiring of the data of these actors.
Absolutely, there's a whole profession. We've got professional motion capture specialists, technology, performance, production, all of it. And some people we've got there's a game we're motion capturing for at the moment, which is involving rugby players. So we need impacts, we need sporting impacts. And rugby players are very good at that, but ordinary people aren't. And if you're going to do it properly, you need people who know how to give and receive that kind of impact. You have them on mats and that kind of stuff, but you need the physical impact to work for the game. It's amazing how good the human eye is at picking up certain types of quality of movement. And you don't know you're doing it, but you can tell it if it's right or wrong.
This is another classic question for this sort of conversation, but imagine I was a 17-year-old, or I was a bit younger than that, deciding on what to do for my A levels, for example. How would you guide me into finding the right place for me within the computer games industry?
I would work out what areas I'm interested in. You do something you're passionate in and then build on that. So if you are passionate about art, practice your art and get good at it. And there are lots of different areas of art. You don't have to be the best painter in the world. You can be a really good manipulator of 3D shapes and 3D spaces. But try and do something you enjoy, because you'll spend more time practicing. And we all need to practice on everything we do. So it came back to this whole idea of continual learning. The best artists in the world, we work with some of the best artists in the world with 2000 AD, for example. They are super good comics artists. They always draw all the time.
Yeah.
If you're having a beer with a professional comics artist, it's a fair chance they're actually drawing as they're drinking and chatting with you. They just never stop practicing. It's really amazing. And I think that's, goodness sake, don't go into a difficult creative job unless you really like the thing you want to do. And if you're good at organizing people, that's great. Go work out how to get into production, offer to help people. Don't expect to go in at a really high level, though, unless you start your own business. There are things you need to learn. You can learn quickly, but nobody's going to be a senior producer on a computer game with their first gig. It'd be very unusual, and probably wouldn't be right, because you'd be out of your depth. You don't really understand how it works. But you could be a senior producer after you've made one thing, probably one big thing. If you're lucky, if you're really talented, you probably wouldn't be. You probably go in as a sort of an associate senior. But there's a sort of route to get through it. If you don't want to go through the route, as it were, you don't want to follow a path of professional training and professional skills, start your own company.
Right.
Do it yourself.
Because you feel, I think a lot of people do, that I find myself playing games on my phone in particular, which wouldn't surprise me if three people did it. So
Yeah.
they could be million dollar franchises in their own right, but they began with just three people doing it. So you believe that there's still a rebellion opportunity these days as there was in 1984?
Absolutely, more so than ever. You can make a game, and if you're lucky, and if it's good, and if the wind's blowing in the right direction, you can make a living out of it. You can do it yourself these days. We went through this phase where it was actually impossible to have a small team making a game. It just wasn't plausible. The mechanisms weren't there. Now, because of digital delivery, the mechanism is there. One person in their bedroom having a good idea in 3 months can make a game that can sell millions and millions of copies worldwide. That's wonderful. That gives you the flexibility. The skill comes in making the second game to sell 1 million copies worldwide.
Yeah, it's the sophomore slump you've got to avoid.
Exactly.
This is another grand one, but are there any particular video games, computer games, or films or TV shows that have really inspired you of late, that have made you think more about that crossover between the two genres?
Not really. No, I feel like what's happening is that the computer games stuff is infiltrating movies, not the other way around. It used to be the other way around. People wanted to Aliens versus Predators, basically two movies slammed together, and everybody wanted to make games based on really successful movies. That's not the case anymore. It literally isn't the case anymore. People want to make computer games, and they want to make original computer games. And the challenge for filmmakers is finding people who want to make computer games with their franchise, basically. And there's few and far between, and they don't guarantee success either. There've been some really big movie franchises have had quite good games made that have failed miserably. And there've been a lot of original games that have done incredibly well and do super in the marketplace. But the options are open for you. It's going to be difficult as an individual for you to make a massive AAA game. In fact, it's almost impossible. You need a big team of people and lots of outsourcers and lots of management and lots of kind of administration. But you can make a small great game.
Nothing wrong with that at all. I find it interesting that you've got films like Uncharted, which are based on a video game franchise, which itself is unabashedly based on Indiana Jones, which is itself is unabashedly based on sort of pulp comics from the early 20th century. And likewise, you have GTA as a sort of video game behemoth. And I can see the editing and sort of style of play of that game in films now, where you go, oh yes, they're creating a sort of Crank style GTA moment here. Can you give us any examples of when you've gone, oh, that's them lifting that straight out of, I don't know.
Well, I think the challenge for filmmaking is first person action. I think that's always quite difficult. There've been a few
Hardcore
movies where
Henry, yeah.
exactly they've lent into that first person. So a variety of different levels of success. I think almost the first person view in a game is because you are controlling it. whereas in a movie you're not, you're being controlled. So I'm not sure. I think there's a little bit of a clash there, perhaps. But the as you say, the adventure tropes, the action movie tropes were all really introduced by comic books back in, as you say, back in the 20th century, because those were the computer games of the day. And then
Aha.
TV and film took over, and comics disappeared. We actually own the vast bulk of those, of the treasury of British comics. If anybody's interested, got a whole strand of republishing some absolute stone cold classics of computer games that are actually comics before computer games, if you see what I mean.
Mm.
Things like the spider and the steel claw, and it's brilliant. Anyway, that's not for this chat, but yeah, those tropes go through. They're about entertainment. They're about enjoying the protagonist's struggle and almost feeling like the protagonist is you. And of course, in a computer game, the protagonist is often you.
Yeah.
And that's why it makes it more immersive in many ways. So yeah, I think we all stand on each other's shoulders. We always have in the entertainment industry, and in a broad sense, people will borrow tropes that work from each other. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to see how it works.
Yeah, the phrase I use is everything is a remix. And there's a great YouTube series from a while ago now, which is showing how everything you love is actually something else somebody else loves, but in a different version. Star Wars is, Japanese cinema and so on and so on. But as we start to wrap things up, I was wondering about whether there was a recent debut, or maybe not debut, but second release of a company or an individual or a small team of people in the gaming world that's really impressed you, where you've gone, okay, well, those people have talent and I like what they're doing.
Every single person that releases a game impresses me. Honestly, once you make something creative, you realize how much effort goes into making anything and getting it finished. Getting the thing done and out there for other people to look at, I think is what impresses me. It doesn't matter whether the game is hugely successful or not. Well done if it is successful. Well done if it isn't successful, because you've finished it and you can move on to the next thing. So I am and there's a vast number of people making a vast number of really exciting things, and I always avoid specifically naming anything, simply because I'll forget something that I'm really impressed by, and I'll go, oh, I should have said that as well, and what about that, and I really like that bit from that. Now that's really clever. Oh, that didn't quite work, but I could see what they were doing. And I almost because of my experience in the games industry, I can sort of almost see past the smoke and mirrors of every game, and I can see the challenges they've had, and I can see the decisions that I might have made slightly differently, or the
Mhm.
decisions that they got right that I think, oh, that's interesting. I probably would have done it differently, but I think they made the right decision there for that particular genre. Um, so yeah, I don't want to single anybody out. I want to single everybody out and say, well done for getting it done.
And on that note, I was wondering, I suppose this will tie into what you've just said, but you are the chairman of the Independent Game Developers Association. What does that entail?
Well, that was started because we weren't, as a games developer back in the day, weren't allowed to join the trade body for the games industry. That was only for publishers and distributors. We were literally not
Whoa.
allowed. There was no representative body for games developers, the people that make games. We were
The
not allowed to
publishers
join.
were like, yes, we created all of this. This is all our hard work.
Correct. They were a bit like the record labels ignoring the fact that it was the musicians making the music, and you weren't allowed to join. So we set up a trade body with a view to sharing skills. I mean, I literally sat there I came up with it in the first place. It's my idea, along with my brothers, and we got a few of the bigger games developers together. Said, look, we don't need a collective voice like a union, but we do need a place to sort of talk shop. And there are certain things that none of us can bring up about the industry that the trade body can bring up, because nobody will be blackballed by the publishers then, because it was very much they controlled the money and controlled our routes to market entirely. It was very, very fixed market, much like it is in film and TV at the moment. There's certain gatekeepers that control what can and can't be made. That's gone now in games. It's still there in film and TV in a sort of weird retro way. It's very odd. But unlike YouTube, for example, where you make what you like within certain parameters, and if people like it, great, and if they don't get to watch it. Simple as that. Um, So we set it up with a view to doing that, and then I think there were 9 big companies set it up, including Rebellion, and Rebellion is the last man standing. We are in that Colosseum, surrounded by the corpses and blood of other failures, not failures, but people who've been bought out, closed down, gone bust. We're the last man standing. I sort of feel like we're a little bit Spartacus or something, or Gladiator. Go, hey, are you not amused? And we're the last one there. It's probably a bit too visual, but it's still going strong, and we lobby government. We managed to get the video games tax relief agreed, which was again my idea. It took us 10 years to get it, and it's very similar to the way that there's tax relief for film and TV, broadly similar. So it's very exciting, but it also is an indication of the industry maturing. And we're no longer whiz kids, even though some people like to keep calling us whiz kids. It's like, no, I'm a whiz adult or something like that, whiz old adult,
Those
a whiz
brainy boffins.
exactly that kind of thing. So I think having a trade body that can represent the commercial business and cultural interests of the games industry are important. And the culture of games is something that we're going to lose unless we somehow maintain the technology to play the very first games.
Yes, that's also true. And that's another reason why we need to have this Royal Games Arcade. That's
Absolutely perfect.
no longer a joke. We need to be able to go in and play Pong as it was played in as terrible a bowed glass screen as possible into a baked-in desk. Anyway, if you were tomorrow, let's say, to win a lifetime Oscar or BAFTA for your work, who would you like to thank in your hypothetical acceptance speech? Who has helped you along the way? I know your brother's obviously on the tip of your lips, but who's helped you get to where you are today?
Games players, without question. The people that play the games, that support us, that give us their hard-earned cash to entertain them, and that comment positively or negatively, that give us feedback, that send in bug reports, that are
Yeah.
enthusiastic about this crazy technological and creative industry that is the games industry. I'm just so chuffed to have been in at the more or less the beginning of the industry and still be doing what I love as an independent. There's very few people that can say that, and I'm just proud to say I can do that. But it all comes down to the games players, basically. So thank you.
I also just love that when you have an established brand like yours, there's a trust. And when you build up a trust, it's so wonderful to go, well, I'll buy whatever the next game Rebellion release because I like them and that's what they do. They do good stuff that appeals to me. So yeah, I think that's a perfect answer because it's about the building up of a fan base that cares and that wants to complain at you and wants to say you're great.
Yeah, it's absolutely a two-way street. We couldn't make games the scale we do without the people buying it. And those people pay a little bit towards us all continuing to make new games. And you're right, selling a game to somebody once they've been really pleased with the last game they bought is so much easier than convincing them to buy something that they've never heard of.
A what? A sniper
Yeah,
what?
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Jason, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. We all do, and it's been fascinating. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Pleasure. That was very good fun. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Jason Kingsley for that great chat. We've got 3 full days of the festival still to go. We're only on day 1. If you enjoyed this conversation with Jason Kingsley, you may enjoy other digital events on Friday. We've got Demystifying the Video Game Industry Development Process, where industry professionals will guide us through how their favorite video games have been created from beginning to end. And we've also got this live on Zoom tomorrow at 3 p.m. So head to the BFI Future Film Festival website for more information. On Friday evening, we've got the Friday Hotspot with none other than Oscar-nominated writer-director Rian Johnson. Please do yourself a favor and join us for that one right here on YouTube at 6:30. Not to be missed. We've also got over at the BFI South Bank our jam-packed in-venue program, which continues with an incredible masterclass or 2, workshops, panel discussions, and more. You can buy festival passes and discover all the events we have in store over on our website or by following the Film Academy social channels. I've been Ali Plumb. You've hopefully been entertained and educated and informed. Thank you so much for joining us.